Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the YoProKnow. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the YoProKnow, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire, develop, and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There are a lot of young professional fish in the sea, as I like to say, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, I am so excited to have Sallie Holder join us, founder and CEO of The BRIMM, speaker, author, and business coach, coming to us live from Greenville, South Carolina. I admire the impact Sallie has made on thousands of female business owners through her coaching and audiences across the country via her keynotes and book. I knew she would be a great guest on the show to walk us through some aspects of her work that can help business leaders like our listeners utilize innovative techniques and data to drive stronger engagement and retention of young professional talent. Her sales expertise can be applied to attracting talent as well, and I have no doubt she will share some crucial insights today to help our listeners grow, which is always a goal here on the show. Sallie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Camber. I'm excited to be here.
I am too, and I've admired and watched your business from afar for several years, and so I'm really honored that you're here sitting on the show today, and also just really happy that we've been able to connect recently, so this is very appropriate and fitting, I think. We're going to get started with what we call a lightning round. Okay. So in a few sentences or less, kind of walk through some of these questions with me. Okay. Tell us something that is not on your resume, so something people wouldn't know just by looking at a piece of paper.
I actually spent the summer in New York dancing on scholarship with the Joffrey Ballet when I was 14.
Wow.
So that is very random.
Yes.
And not something that would be predictable, and It's not on my resume. So
yeah, no, I wouldn't. I love this question. I mean, some of the answers are wild, and so that's one that I just wouldn't have guessed, but I love now. I'm so happy I know that information. What is your favorite productivity tool?
So we actually give away this this time block, and you can use it and place it on your desk, and you can flip it to different areas. So 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 60 minutes. And I really find that if you're working in chunks like that, you can be far more productive. Plus, sometimes if there is a task that you're dreading doing, being able to put it on a timer makes you more likely to begin. And most of the time, that's all we need is just the start, and then we can get in and accomplish it. So I love that little productivity block or time block.
Yeah, our team just did a training on the Pomodoro technique.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've talked about getting those little tools for everybody on the team, which hearing you talk about it maybe means that we should be doing it. Maybe it's a sign.
Yes. I have some branded BRIMM ones. I'll bring them for you guys.
Oh, we would love that. That's a great idea. Maybe YoPro needs to do that too. Can you tell us about a lesson that you learned as a young professional?
So I think one of the lessons that I wish I had known at that time, I'm going to kind of flip the question a little bit, is that I remember having an expertise, like what I would call is kind of my zone of genius. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was speaking. And I came across it really by accident. I was kind of thrown into a situation when I was practicing law. And I remember going to an older attorney and saying, hey, I would love to do this full time. And his response to me was, that's not a thing. And so the thing I always tell young professionals is it is a thing. You can do anything these days that you want. And whenever it is that you recognize what your natural talents are and gifts, that's what you're intended to pursue. And I wish I knew that as a young professional, and I would have pursued that much earlier in my career instead of waiting probably another 15 years.
Well, I think that's really a great way to kind of kick off the meat of the conversation today. And going into that, you talked about when you were an attorney. One of my questions was just to give us a little bit more background, because I think your story is what makes your journey so impactful, right? And the work that you do now. So tell us a little bit more about your background so that people have a little bit more context.
Yeah. So I always say I followed kind of the yellow brick road to success. I did what I was quote unquote supposed to do. I went to Vanderbilt undergrad. I went immediately to law school, and then to the third largest labor and employment law firm in the country. And I practiced litigation there for 10 years was successful. And I think that that's the really difficult part of most people's story is that they became successful at one thing and then they realized, wait a minute, that might not also align with what my gifts and talents are. It may not align with what my passions are. And that's what happened to me, is that despite being successful at it, despite being good at it, and it's what Gay Hendricks calls your zone of excellence, I didn't love it. And so I had a really hard time making a transition then and giving up that career to do something else when everybody else in my life was saying to me, why in the world would you leave after being recognized in so many ways for your practice? And so I had to kind of buck the trend and say, I feel it in my gut, in my heart, that this is not what I'm meant to do forever. And so I actually took over a corporate and tax firm as their CEO and then served in that CEO role for hire. And I worked with 6 different companies after that in different industries. And I loved what I was doing with them operationally, but I really found within those companies what I was best at is revenue growth. And so I had a female entrepreneur approach me and said, would you teach us what you've been doing within these companies? And I said, what does that look like? And she said, you would be our coach. And I was like, oh, okay. Sure. And so I kind of fell into coaching, but I knew I would always eventually end up as an entrepreneur. And I didn't know how or what it would look like. And I spent a lot of time talking today to people wanting to make that similar transition, telling them you're not supposed to know how. You're just supposed to take the next step in front of you. And that's what I did. And eventually you'll get where you're supposed to go.
Yeah. And how many years ago was that? Like, when did you officially start? Because it's so interesting for me to hear how it all started. So when was that?
I started the BRIMM in 2018.
Okay.
I wrote my book in 2019, and it was published in January of 2020. And so I was actually on a book tour when COVID hit.
Oh, man.
And had given up every one of my clients. So I had all of my revenue and my entire business based on, the next phase being built on this book. And then I was out of both, right? And so, again, there are going to be twists and turns throughout your career, no matter what, and you'll face obstacles. And I definitely think that the next iteration of the company came as a result of that obstacle. But the next iteration was even better. Right. And so it was, it's all meant to be, whether we want it to happen that way or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And bring us to today, the BRIMM. And obviously you're doing a lot of speaking. What does today's BRIMM look like?
Yeah. So today I only work with female entrepreneurs and I work with them specifically on their sales growth. So I have a program called the Sales Accelerator and it gives them a container to provide both the sales process and the business structure that they need in order to create sales growth. What I find is that very often people are offering a tip, a tool, but what we know to be true in business is that when you provide one solution to a problem, it actually opens up another problem. And so this program, the Sales Accelerator, is intended to take you through that entire cycle of problem solution so that you end up with massive growth. Typically, we help them 3x their revenue in 90 days.
Yeah. Well, we're going to come back to that in a little bit because you are really a very different guest than we've had in the past and why we wanted to bring you on. And I know you know this already, but for those who are listening and watching, we encourage our companies that we work with and our audiences to, they're looking for ways to attract and retain talent. Innovation is one of those ways. Obviously, you work with female entrepreneurs. Innovation to its core. We also talk to our clients about selling your culture at a company. That is the new way of hiring and retaining talent. It is selling in a non-salesy way.
For sure.
And so we're going to talk a lot about that. So diving into the next question here, we're talking about the young professional generation. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on this topic today. So this is, our 21 to 39-year-olds, so some Gen Z, some millennials, about almost half and half at this point, that will make up 2/3 of the workforce by 2030. Yeah, it's crazy. Help us set the stage by talking about this massive emergence from your experience working with your clients. What are you hearing and seeing about these two generations? And I'll throw one more generation in there because you have kids. You have two kids,
do,
right?
yes,
Are they Gen Z or Gen Alpha? How old are they?
16 and 13.
Okay, so really right on the cusp. Like you've got a Gen Zer and a Gen Alpha, like cusper. So that's interesting. So you can throw in like as a parent of the future generation too. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So I am fascinated by the fact that we are being approached by entrepreneurs who are becoming younger and younger and younger. I would say even 6 years ago, the average age of my client ranged more between 42 and 48. And now I'm having clients approach me who want to start businesses who are in their mid-20s. And I'm very impressed by that, but it makes sense. The statistics show that 63% of Gen Zers and millennials will either have an entrepreneur, like become an entrepreneur full time, or have some sort of entrepreneurial bent. Like they will have a side hustle, they will have something. And so that is just part of their DNA. They don't have to have access to capital like I did. They don't have to have access to, reaching a large customer base because that's at their fingertips. So it's more readily available than ever before. And I will say also that the fact that it's more readily available can benefit corporations because many of them will begin and realize, wait a minute, I don't actually have the expertise necessary. I need to reroute and go into the corporate world and get some of that expertise. And I think that that's the big opportunity that companies have today is that, lots of people fall into the entrepreneurial world thinking it's going to be simple. It's going to be easy. And it is not. It is very challenging personally, professionally.
I can tell you.
and walking through that, is it's very different than they believe it will be. And when you're in the entrepreneurial world, you lack all of the benefits that the corporate world can bring to you, like mentorship and like, investment in your professional development. All of those things are up to you. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity in the corporate world to provide those things and really scoop up all of, those entrepreneurial-minded young professionals and give them a place to land.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into the next question, which is talking about most of the listeners and viewers of this show are business leaders looking to attract and retain talent in innovative ways, right? So one, how do they do that using entrepreneurship and innovation? So what are some specific things and kind of moving from that last question in a post-pandemic workplace, because that's the kicker too. Like we are in this kind of still strange new normal. And two, kind of part two of this question, how can companies become more entrepreneurial and innovative if they wish to hire and retain young professional talent? That's really hard for some of these major corporations. So what would you say to that? I know that was a loaded question.
Yeah. Okay, let me attack the first part first about how can they be more entrepreneurial and innovative. And my favorite thing to do in the entrepreneurial world is take what's working in the corporate world and apply it to entrepreneurs. I think that the corporate world ought to do the exact same. I think that they ought to think about, okay, what is working for our, young professionals in that place? Why are they wanting to stay there? And some of the reason is that there are benefits that can come to them. But these are benefits that would be fully open and available to the corporate world if they would just have this innovative mindset and pay attention to what these young professionals or young entrepreneurs are valuing in the entrepreneurial world. One is it is so easy for a company to create affiliate relationships. And they can be locally, right? You could partner with gyms, a juice bar, because wellness is very much valued by this generation. Find things that they also value. So it could be things, purposeful activities, and allow those to be partnerships that you develop, but pass along the benefits to the young professionals, right? it is wildly attractive to a young professional to say, hey, not only working for us are you going to get all of these things within, like the skills and the training and the expertise and the mentorship, but you're also going to get some of these benefits that you might have created on your own had you had your own business, like a 50% discount at the juice bar and a 25% off at your local gym. I mean, these things really add up for them and can be significant cost savings. And they're things that our entrepreneurs are doing every day, not to mention you get that cross promotion that's working so well. And you're leveraging other people's networks. And that's what's working, right? It's third parties being able to say that this is an excellent company rather than you being your own microphone. You want other people to be that. And those partnerships will give you that.
Yeah. Let me just pause there because I love all of that. I have to mention that we're in the middle of our 2024 survey right now where we are trying to reach 10,000 future and current young professionals. And you hit the nail on the head. Some of the results that we're seeing already without reaching the 10,000 surveyors so far, we have found gym stipends are huge, right? Benefits and wellness are huge. And so just hearing you mention that from your own experience and talking, I mean, you're really spot on with what we're hearing from future and current young professionals, both in high school, college, and the 21 to 39 range. So I just have to mention that. But going back to what you said earlier, just about how companies should be doing what entrepreneurs are doing, right? Like we're looking at what can we pull that corporate is doing, they should be doing the same thing. And that is not something that is happening often, but I believe that can really become a trend because once corporations start to realize like this might actually work, it can make a big difference. So thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. Part two, kind of going back to that second, you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, that would be great.
How can companies become more entrepreneurial and innovative? Like what can they do is it just a matter of doing what you just said, or is it kind of getting some training involved? Like, what does that look like?
So I definitely think the adoption of those practices, but I think that they also can be very mindful of things that, this generation also values, which is feedback. Feedback is a big part, and feedback looks different than what maybe their generation experienced. Feedback to maybe my generation, I'm getting ready to be 45, looked like my submission of a piece of paper to my managing attorney, and he would fill it out and provide, excellent feedback, things that I could do better. In today's world, in a more, with a more entrepreneurial lens, if you're doing something well as an employee, you want to be highlighted in a bigger way. You want that feedback to be given to your community. You want it to be highlighted on social media. You want to be shown in the entire, workforce that you are great at what you do. And so highlighting success stories and accomplishments and the path that they took to create that success is really important. And the other thing I think that is so important is being able to give these young professionals a clear path to professional development. I cannot tell you how many of I'll just go very generally, 35-year-old female entrepreneurs that I work with simply are there because their employer couldn't provide them a professional path to growth that looked doable and achievable with families and kids, et cetera. And I can speak from my experience. I had 2 kids under the age of 5 and was practicing law full time. And in order to come home at 5 o'clock every day and simply get that commitment from my practice, I had to take a 50% reduction in pay. I worked 50 hours.
So many thoughts.
And I think that in today's world, talent ought to be valued over this very temporary period of time where you are seeing someone go through potentially a very temporary struggle. That's where I think that meeting with them more, providing that clear path to growth could have prevented me from exiting all day long, because I would have been able to see what the next phase could have looked like for me, and what returning might look like. And you can do that through all different methods, delaying their professional analysis and, helping them prioritize their family and show that you prioritize that too. I found it very interesting that the Harvard Business Review said that it's not just a female thing anymore either, that men in today's workforce equally prioritize family as women do. And that giving men the same ability to have that flexibility during that very temporary period of time where it is most difficult and challenging. And I say that it's most challenging when you're simply in a new phase, right? You're trying to adjust to adulthood and your corporate environment and being a parent. And so you're trying to combine all of those. And so show them that you're willing to work through that with them. It is far less expensive, believe me, as a labor and employment lawyer. We did the math many times. Far less expensive to hang on to that talent and give them a small reprieve during a short period of time than it would be to go and acquire new talent and get that talent up to speed and to become as effective as the person that you currently have.
Yeah, such just an important perspective, because I think companies, when they hear entrepreneurial and they hear innovative, they think startup. They immediately go to that. But there's so many ways that they can be innovative and be entrepreneurial by supporting their team members, not just young professionals, but all team members, right? Because the world is changing and the world has become more innovative and entrepreneurial. And so it's what you just said, what you just shared is this perspective that changes. It's not all right, we're supporting anybody that wants to become an entrepreneur. It's not that.
What you're saying is so true. And what I hear you saying is that they are swinging the pendulum to 10. And that's how I describe it, is that in many companies that I work with, when I'm doing speaking engagements about integrating this entrepreneurial mindset into their company, they immediately say, but we have to become radically different. No, that's swinging the pendulum to 10.
Yes.
I always challenge them to look at 4, 5, and 6. What is the 4, 5, and 6 for you? How do we take a piece of what's working in the entrepreneurial world and integrate it into what we already have that's working? Because we're all looking to become incrementally better. And if you become a 4 on the scale of the, ingratiating yourself into entrepreneurship, that will be wildly better than you were previously sitting at a 0.
Yeah. Wow, we could probably talk just about that for the entire time, but let's jump over, kind of shift gears a little bit. You've been featured across some major media outlets, so kudos to you.
Thank you.
Including CBS, USA Today, Forbes, and Yahoo, just to name a few, that highlights your sales coaching program. So walk us through what that can look like from the perspective of hiring and attracting the next generation of talent. So going back to what we mentioned at the beginning, which is sales can be applied to many different areas and many different industries. So let's kind of plop that into the concept of hiring and attracting talent.
I loved getting this question from you because it made me think differently, and that's something I love to do. And so what I created in this program is what I call the growth formula, and it absolutely applies, and that's what I teach in the Sales Accelerator. And it does absolutely apply to the corporate environment. G is all about beginning with your goals, right? And what I find ends up going wrong for many people is that they begin where they are now versus starting with the end in mind. And so, if you're going to achieve some significant goals like a shift in your culture or the growth of your sales team, or that you want to acquire, 1,000 new customers over a period of time, then we have to start with the assumption that that goal has already been achieved and work our way backwards. And so, G is really all about the development of your true sales plan and strategy. and looking at, what are we missing? What do we not have now that would be necessary if that was already achieved? And then, R is being able to rethink your time and rethink the allocation of time. All too often, people set incredibly lofty goals, but they do not adjust anything else. And that is such a it's just such a horrible mistake because it leaves you feeling overwhelmed. And the very first thing that we do, right, when we're overwhelmed is we shut down, right? Because it creates, anytime there's a lack of clarity, we have greater fear. So I work with them on batch working. I work with them on figuring out how to integrate the new goals into their business in a way that makes it optimized, right? Because you have other revenue streams, you have other goals, you have other things that you want and need to achieve. So how are we going to integrate this in what needs to go and what stays? And then O is being able to optimize your offers. So in the corporate world, I would say, right, let's optimize what it is that you're selling and how you're presenting it. In today's world, it is wildly different than it was even 10 years ago. The way that you sell, the way that you talk about what you have to offer is very different. It is very focused on benefits. And we don't have time, quote unquote, or to the space to hear a lot about the features until after we have decided to buy from you, after we've decided we want to work for you, that we believe what you believe. And so to optimize the offer, it has to incorporate your sense of purpose. It has to incorporate your company's vision. It has to incorporate all of the many benefits, maybe some of those amazing affiliate programs you've created, and painting a picture for the person that you are trying to acquire, if that's what you're doing versus a customer. If you're acquiring talent, you're painting a picture of what their life could look like and how they will feel. Feeling is what stays with people, right? What we say is never remembered, but how we make others feel is always remembered. And so if you can get them walking away that they feel empowered, having been in the room with you, that's all you need. And then W is helping to obviously win your most ideal client. So in this circumstance, it is about, winning your ideal talent. So what needs to change? So oftentimes, again, there will be fundamental changes to your overall messaging, not just in that room, but what now needs to be reflected on our website, what now needs to be reflected in our marketing materials in order to win that talent. Because my goal is that I help people create a sales process that is going to do the work for them, not that you are fundamentally having to create this over and over and over. Because that's the hamster wheel no one wants to be on. So I want you to be able to win that talent with less effort and less work. And there are strategic ways to do that. And then T is we're being able to think like that entrepreneur, think like the CEO, and really apply all of these processes kind of together so that it all works together in a systemized engine. If you parcel out one and you only do one, then again, it kind of begins that problem solution cycle that I was talking about. If you're addressing something on, say, your social media and you're talking about it one way, but they begin to get in the room with you and then, right, you haven't optimize the offer to talk about it. It's not going to fit and you will feel very frustrated. And that's why each part of the process has to be really aligned. And then H, I like to call just having fun. Love that. Sales can be fun. It can absolutely be merely about you solving problems for other people. And it's bringing it back to the fundamental of you love what you do and you're attempting to help other people realize that they can love it too if they can let down their barriers. And so the more you are energized and filling your cup with the fun, the more magnetic you and your company will be.
Yeah.
I think that way too often we are mired down in the details. And don't get me wrong, I love a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And I love measuring things and numbers. However, we can't forget about the component of, like energetically showing up in the way that we want others within our company to show up, right? Excited, empowered. And oftentimes we have to fill our cups in that way as a salesperson long before we put ourselves out there to make the sale.
I feel like we need to give you a round of applause in here because I loved how prepared you came for that. Thank you. And I love how it can be replicated in the corporate world, right? Like this sales, which I love the formula. I think this is really well done. And it even gives me some ideas because we have our own formula for clients that we work with. And the way that you present it is just so clear. And again, it's very clear to me how you can apply that in the corporate space when you're attracting and retaining talent because you're always selling, right? Always. And so just because you get them in the door does not mean that they're going to stay in the door. So you have to continue that non-salesy approach, which is all of the things you've talked about today. And I think having fun is the one thing that some leaders might be like, all right, but
I did. Yeah. I dismissed it for years, not believing that it had to be part of the process. And that's why I intentionally integrated it, is that it was stopping me. I thought that it could only be tactical. And I've come to realize it is not simply just tactics. If it were, I 100% would tell you.
Well, thank you for again putting that in a way that really makes sense for our audience because I think that's really beneficial and impactful. So thank you. Let's talk about kind of your coaching work. Let's continue talking about it. But you do focus primarily on female entrepreneurs, as we've talked about today. Can you shed any insight into some data surrounding young professional males and females? And are there any differences when it comes to how they approach innovation and work? The reason why I'm asking this question is because I do get some questions that are like, all right, are you seeing young professional turnover in men or women? Like, are you seeing it just across the board? And so I'm just curious to know, and you don't have to have the answer to that question specifically, but I am curious what you're seeing because you are working with one group. And so I'd love to know more.
Yeah. While my program really is dedicated to providing this container for female entrepreneurs, I still speak to, audiences of both men and women, and I'm still doing the research associated with entrepreneurship in general. So obviously it is going to impact both. And I think that, kind of what I was hinting at earlier, interestingly enough, is looking at the fact that the similarities are far greater now than the differences that exist between men and women. And so we're actually finding that in today's workforce that the values are more aligned between men and women. The things that they want are more aligned between men and women. Where the gap comes, and you'll not be surprised by this, is by corporations tending to pigeonhole men into a perspective or particular job and women into another particular job. Yeah. And so it actually becomes the entrance, like the organizational structure that you have at the entrance into your company. And so where they land at the beginning of their career with you is what ends up dictating their path to growth and dictating whether or not one gender or the other will have more success in your company. And to me, that's about having your leadership team, do some work on, breaking through their, societal beliefs, limiting beliefs around what positions are more appropriate for women versus men, and being able to kind of buck the trend of what they've thought was true. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Thank you for sharing, because it does go back to the beginning a lot of times. And so action step for the audience today is, if you're not already practicing this, can you get your leadership team together and then bring other people, right? Because you can't just make decisions without asking anymore. You have to go to the people that this is actually impacting and experiencing. And so going back to what you shared earlier, just about the trajectory, because you want to have a family, right?
one of the things that we're seeing from our 2024 survey, and again, we don't have all of the final results yet, but we are seeing maternity and paternity leave is very important. And again, men want it too. Like I have friends, I'm 28, I have friends who they're upset if their husbands don't, and the husbands are upset if they don't have any type of leave. That's different.
It is very
It's
different.
a shift. And so you have to question, like, what is it going to look like in 10 years? What is Gen Z, once they're fully in the workforce, going to view this as? What are Gen Alpha going to do? So you have to constantly be thinking about this. And companies that are behind the mark on this, they will lose top talent.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, like I keep saying, that Harvard Business Review saying men and women prioritize equally family above work. And what we end up finding, and I hear quite often, is that what happens is the man wants to take his paternity leave, and yes, it is available. However, that is not institutionally encouraged, right? And so people are always going to go with, what is actually practiced versus what is said. And so if the institution doesn't generally have men taking their paternity leave, they are far more likely not to take it because of fear of ridicule, their fear of being shamed, their fear of being rejected, or determined that they are no longer desiring upward mobility in the company. And that even that assumption on their part is going to disconnect them from their desire to be as energetic, as much of an advocate externally for the company as you need them to be, right? And so I think that it does come down to practicing what you preach, ensuring that if this is something that is encouraged, that it is actually carried out. And that does require, some significant training, probably of those in my generation, to encourage that and to state that this has no bearing on whether or not they have long-term commitment to this company or whether or not they're lazy or not, right? They'll make silly assumptions about people.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is something that I'm really hearing among my peer group right now. And I do know companies where the men feel ashamed to take it, even if they have, some large corporations are offering 4 months now, which is huge.
Wow. Impressive.
But again, it's impressive. But if they don't feel comfortable taking it, that's a mindset shift that needs to happen. We've constantly been saying today.
But imagine if you then had a path or a trajectory for growth that involved, mentoring and, an investment in their professional development upon return, right? Don't just give them the leave, but give them then the tools to, make use of the leave and keep going. Because the fear isn't around necessarily just taking the leave. It's about, how am I going to be perceived by my peers, and how am I going to enter back in a way that's going to make me continuously effective for you, right? No one wants to show up to work and suck. Right? And I tell people that all the time. Yes, your employees may not be performing to the level that you want to, but you cannot believe that they want to be doing a bad job. They want to perform for you. They want to do the best of their ability. And it is, we have to meet them where they are. And so it's 50% our responsibility as the owner, and it's 50% their responsibility as the employee to create this win-win relationship.
Yeah. And just one more thought on this topic, because I think it's just important to discuss. We have a shrinking population, right? So if you're going to inhibit growth when somebody needs to take some time away for their family, that's going to scare other generations and other young professionals, right? Who or non-young professionals that are looking to have that family. Not to mention women or men that have to leave the workforce completely after having children. And so that's just maybe another conversation for another day. But
it's true.
We have a shrinking workforce, or we have a shrinking population in general, and so that is something worth noting.
I could not agree more. Yeah,
So
it's a very competitive landscape out
yeah,
there.
oh, it is. So let's wrap things up today. And I know again we could talk about this for much longer. But I'm going to ask you in a moment just any other things you want to share that we haven't touched on today. But as the growing number of young professionals enter the workforce and Gen X, baby boomer generations begin to retire, where do you see the biggest challenge from your respective industry or with your clients?
I mean, I would say technology, right? I am sure that it is, at top of mind for most of the listeners to the podcast is this big gap that exists, right? Between those who are native to technology and those of us who are not. And where I find the problem that exists right now is the lack of trust on the part of those who have been in the workforce for a while, have skills and expertise that don't involve, right, this native form of technology. And so the clash begins to occur when the young professional wants to integrate that technology and there is skepticism or hesitation or, doubt simply on the effectiveness of the technology. And again, I would challenge both parties to come together and ask themselves, what's the 4, 5, and 6? We can all stand in our camps at either end of the spectrum and one say that we ought to be on every single platform utilizing, every digital tool that exists, and then the other side saying it should all be on paper. Right. So there is a happy medium. And we begin the process by finding one that would, and I would argue somewhere on that growth formula, find one that begins that process for you. Maybe there is, one in a technology tool that can assist you in getting to your goals and helping that be mapped out visually. There are a lot of those technology tools that can help you, right, map that out and be able to show that. So it might be, you want the destination and you want to incorporate the technology and utilize the young professional to provide that roadmap, right, to using the technology to get there. We hate being beginners. We hate being people that don't know everything because, again, there is a fear of being replaced. And at the end of the day, fear is never going to take you where you ultimately want to go. And if we're being led by fear, we actually are moving backwards instead of forwards. And so, as scary as it can be to try to learn AI and, integrate ChatGPT and all of the other things, put your toe in the pond and just begin and start with one tool and one thing that will provide the greatest sense of relief for you and your workforce, and then move on to the next one. The sense of overwhelm and frustration I find from those in my generation is when they try to move right all the way to 10 and they pick up 4, 5, or 6 technology pieces at the same time, and that's just too overwhelming.
It's too much. I really like your pendulum approach. Like that just is refreshing to hear. And it's again, people oftentimes it's like 0 to 100. You don't need to do that. Just ease into some of these practices.
Well, and that's where your mind goes, right? Immediately we go to the worst case scenario. It's how we're built. It's intended to keep us safe where, we're like, what are they even talking about? Now I've got to become some AI expert and that has to be everything I do. And I hear you. Believe me, I hear it all day, every day. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, hey, if there were a tool that would allow you to save 2 hours a day from, having to actually write that blog post from scratch by looking at a blank page with a cursor, and it can give you a head start, wouldn't you want that? Right. And then I tell you, okay, that comes with AI, the integration of it, right? So we've got to, again, begin to ask ourselves, what's our destination? And if that's where we want to go, right? A place that provides, a purposeful environment that welcomes all parties who are filled with talent and living in their zone of genius, and so that we can make the biggest impact on society living in our zone of genius, then we should welcome anything that takes us there and allows us to get there faster.
Yeah. Well, what a great way to wrap up this portion of the episode. Sallie, this has been wonderful. Are there any other things that you want to note or mention that we haven't touched on today?
I would just say I have masterclasses on my website about all different kinds of topics from, the use of the law of attraction in your workplace. Shockingly, it can actually be very effective. And to, sales tools, to the use of ChatGPT and how to use it and how to train it in such a way that it can actually write content for you. So I would say all of those aren't just applicable to the entrepreneurial environment. They apply to you as well. So go there, look at them.
And you're a speaker. And we'll make sure we include your website in all of the material. So those who are listening or watching, you'll definitely be able to contact Sallie. And just a little plug, I have done many of your masterclasses and over the years and have really just learned a lot and have honestly modeled some of the stuff that we do just based on what I see you doing. So I really admire your work and hope that some people will take a look.
Thank you.
So thanks again, Sallie. It's been a pleasure.
Loved it.
Thanks again for joining us on The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this next decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders we need for our future? Join us next time for more information on how to attract, develop, and retain top young professional talent. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others who are interested in this topic find more episodes like this. And don't forget to share with your coworkers. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.